is the head of portfolio delivery of Test and Trace Digital for NHS Digital. So Rajeev, I'm going to ask you to please turn on your camera and join us here. And there is Rajeev, ladies and gentlemen. Rajeev, thank you so much for joining us. Rajeev is a leader, again, in NHS Digital, where he leads technology, AI-related automation, and many other aspects of technology innovation and innovation for value creation as a broader topic. So we're thrilled to have you with us, Rajeev. We're very much looking forward to your insights, to the principles and fundamentals that you apply when you look at digital process automation. Thank you again for taking the time to share your expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose. Much appreciated. Hi, everybody. Rajeev Chakraborty, guilty as charged. I work in the NHS, and I've been working in several different organizations for quite a long time. And as part of that, you tend to get used to the idea of, in many ways, how people see technology, how people understand technology, but more specifically, how people adjust to technology. And for me, that's quite an important bit, the last bit, how we adjust to technology. So if you think back, if you went to somebody and said, I would like to be in your house and I would like to know everything that you're doing all the time. And I know I suppose you understand where I'm going with this. I'm talking about things like privacy, things like everything being watched, or even otherwise, things like, for example, if I told you that if you have to open up your door, you have to do something different, where something as simple as this, all of us have a door lock. And if I told you that the way the door lock is fitted, you'd need to have a screwdriver, you put the screws in every time you go in, and you pull the screws out every time you do that. And you'd look at me and go, you're bonkers, Rajeev. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't. Yet, when we talk of technology, voila, we've got this wonderful device in front of us where you have to put a username and password. So these are things where humans have evolved with technology, and where we've started adjusting to technology as opposed to the other way around. And that's essentially what I do for a living. I look at digital transformation, start at the basics, at what do you really need, and then take it all through the journey and putting it into a place where the technology is serving you. And when you do something like that, I think the most important question is it actually doing something that I want it to do? And that's what I'm going to discuss in the world of AI. So I'll talk about what is AI, what does it actually mean, how ubiquitous it is, where do you find this around your everyday life, and then also what are the things that you can do with the technology that's available. And I'll keep it very generic. I don't want to get into the technical aspect of it, because I'm sure if you go outside, you'll get a dime a dozen outside to tell you exactly how the data lake is configured and all the rest of it. And then after that, I'll show you some things which we are building as an organization. So I own a company called AL London, AL Hub Technologies. Our website is www.aryaaltd.com. That's aryaaltd.com, aryalimited.com. And where we have built some technologies, and mainly to show you that we eat our own dog food. If we say we like privacy, we can show you how it's done. And believe you me, it was super, super difficult. So I'll go through that little bit of a journey at the tail end of this whole presentation. That's essentially what I'm thinking of doing. Is there anything you want to ask? You have any questions before I proceed? Jose, is there anything else you want me to elaborate?
No, that's great. Whenever you're ready to share your presentation, you can click the button and have it broadcast.
Yeah. Okay, so just to confirm, you can see my screen now?
Yes, we can, but we're seeing the one that has the preview on it. So if you go under the sharing tab, and if you can select the one that has only the presentation mode, right now we see the presentation with a preview slide. That's the one. Perfect.
I have. This is what I mean by technology. Okay, so and this is the strange thing, having worked in technology for so long, yet having to know the nuances of it. And so I'll get to that in short. So this is us, RE Associates. We have a product called Fisheye Hub. If you go into App Store, Apple App Store, specifically iOS, we have an app as well. We provide it for free. This is for benefit of people, and we're going through some new and fine changes. So that's where we are. We mostly tend to work within UK, but we have started working at outside outside UK as well. We worked in India, worked with the US. We've in fact worked with a fairly big company in Atlanta. So we have presence outside, but generally we are very focused. One of the ethos we have is we work with who we like. So starting with what is it when you say technology, and then you see there's a whole bunch of things that come in. I mean, you receive and capture all kinds of stuff, you store them and then start categorizing in the technology world, you analyze them, you predict them, and then you start providing meaningful information. But that's no different from what we do as humans, as in we observe things and then we decide how we're going to remember them, or take pictures or make notes, or get them home and keep them in a certain way. And then based on that, we start using them. To use them, we start looking at how do we actually use them? What's the best way? If you think of the typical phone, I'd use this in a certain way. Or if you think of, I don't know, a new charger that you use in a different way. Or it could be your chair, where I've decided to use this in my office, not downstairs. So you do that. And then you start thinking about how comfortable is it? Is it great? If you like it, you end up using it more. If you don't use that at all. So it's essentially trying to categorize that technology world in a very human way, how we react. So what is AI? Now, in the simplest of business speak, so to say, and I know this is not very business, generally it categorizes into three areas. Is you take a lot of data, and that sits in the world of data ops. And then you begin understanding the data, meaning if you see a date and you see that against, let's say, a set of people entering a building, then it's the relevance is timestamp. Whereas if you see the date, that happens to be about starting a computer and using that. That's a timestamp used in a different way. So there are different contexts in which you use that, and then how you categorize it, and then how do you operationalize it? So meaning, what is going to happen to that data? Is that so? And in that world, we use machine language for the operations, and there you talk about how do you integrate this information set or data set or the application in itself talking to each other. How do you do that? What's the point in having that? How do you build a software on that basis? How do you keep that in a secure area? How do you actually make that whole solution quite stable so people can use that? And how do you put this in the real world, where if you were using it at home, you now use it outside? So it's the same thing as you prepare food at home, and if you decide to go to the market and sell that, that'll be a different approach. And that same thing happens in the world of technology, is how you take that and how you operationalize the whole thing. So when you understand these three categories, the biggest challenge that comes across is think of data as the people of the world, and we sit in different in different countries. Think of other creatures as well. They live in the sea, they live in air, but when they have to interact with each other, some things are common. Some things are the way they move, the way they react. Those things are common. And there are others where it may not be common, where it could be the language. So if I said something to someone in my native language, I grew up in India and I speak in Hindi, they wouldn't understand necessarily on the streets of London. There might be some people who will, some might not. That's where the challenge comes in. The same thing in the world of technology. So when you have some data set that comes out of Apple, and there's another one which comes out of Android, and another one comes out of I don't know, from Windows. Yeah, of course, everybody loves Windows. Uh, sorry, had to take a swipe. Apologies. And when you take all this data and you let it talk to each other, it may not necessarily talk to each other, and that's a fact. Because something as simple as in English, if I say gender can mean man or a woman for some people. For the others, there are more categories, and fairly so. Everybody has a right to choose that. So they have that many choices. Same thing in the world of data. You might write date of birth as, I don't know, 1/10/96, and another person might write it as 01/10/96, which shows I'm British, or you could write it as the month, date, and year, and you might use 2 notations instead of 4. These are small little things. Now complicate that with far more complex things where one system will only give you data which only they can understand, no one else can understand. And then imagine another one where they'll say, okay, we'll give you the data, but it'll be encrypted and you can't read that. That's where the engineering aspect comes in. How do we take that data? How do we structure that? How do we engineer it so that, one, it's the least hassle, which in the world of technology, our geek world loves complicating things. So idea would be, how do we take that and how do we not make it complicated to run it? And that's the ideal way to do this. How do we keep the data in such a way that, like humans, you can still stay in your own space and still be able to talk to each other? So a translator that sits there. And then how do we move data set from one place to another? So when you travel from one country to another, you're going through the airports and the visa and the border controls and so on. So there are controls there which identifies you and then tells you you join this queue. So if you come to the shores of Britain, it'll say, oh, if you are from Europe, join this queue. And if you are from UK, join this queue. If you're from the rest of the world, join that queue. That's categorization. That's exactly what we do with data as well. We end up categorizing it. Then you have, how do you store the data? There could be something simple where all the data comes in and you just put them all together. So you go, sit. But then there would be data lakes where you don't know. So this could be, example would be where there's a march on a street and there you have all kinds of people coming in. You'll say, okay, all of you go through this and eventually they'll be segregated. So that's what data lakes would do. They would take everything, put everything in one place and then start segregating eventually as systems start understanding it. Then you bring it into the world of business understanding and say, okay, I have this data. What does it really mean to me? So you could have a simple way of thinking of it is payroll data. And you've got all kinds of payroll data coming in. For you, the question would be, what is the benefit of me analyzing it? What am I trying to achieve? And that's a very, very, very important point. There's one way you think of tech where you say, I'll get some graphs and that will give me the answer. I don't know. That's not really why we use technology. Technology is there to augment human thinking, not the other way around. So then you'd ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve? I'm trying to understand what's the gender pay gap in my company? How long have I had it? Having done some things in the recent past, have I made a difference? Have I actually made anything which makes it easier for my colleagues and my employees to feel better about themselves? Or if we haven't done anything, how do I know? I need some data to drive my decisions, not just I think. So one example is, imagine a company where you have, and this is a fact, I wouldn't want to name names, you have lots of people, 12 different offices. You sit there and the gentleman sits there and he says, he's telling me that I'm sure when you do the analytics, you'll find out that we are very, very good in terms of D&I, that's diversity and inclusion. So I asked him, why? What do you mean? Because, like, for example, see this, I've just hired 3 women in our organization when we were looking for 5. So that was a majority hire. And I was like, yeah, fine, I'll take your word for it. You're paying me. So yeah, I'll believe you. I'm not going to say no to you. And then we went in, we started looking at the data, and you go through the whole thing and you let machine drive that analytics and understand what that means. And we find out that those are the only 3 people they had hired in the last whole year. And that assumption came from him because he thought he was driving it. So where he was having that visibility, he made an impact. The other places he didn't really, and he didn't like that. Now, what that tells me is that that's not data-driven decision. That's a warm, fuzzy feeling you get, which is governed by emotions. Emotions don't always give you the right answer. That's why they are emotions. And where you bring logic in, that's different. Logic is based on evidence, on facts. That's where business understanding comes in. You're saying, I want to know whether we are really D&I compliant or we are good with diversity and inclusion. At that point, You let your data tell you whether you really are that. And when you look at that, then you see the overlap in the way you've captured the data and you're understanding the data. That's when you start looking at the data and say, it does tell me these things, but I'm not necessarily capturing other variables. Like, for example, did this person come in from a challenged background? Did he actually have university education? Did his parents, we have this here in the UK, voluntary, no one forces you to do that. And it's completely anonymized, where people are asked, I've been asked, whether your parents had any university education. And at that point, people can choose to answer or they don't. That's fine. But at least you've got a route to put data enrichment in place. And depending on how you talk to them, meaning what you put on the screen, the user experience of it, it will then decide, the user then decides whether they want to give you more information. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways of data enrichment. The social media world, again, I can't name names for fear of being sued, but there are other ways where they will look at your digital fingerprint, and I'll come to that shortly, where they'll buy information from outside, pair that inside the data set, and put an identifier against that. So I could be subject number 105779, and then they'll bring source 1, social media, source 2, social media, source 3, company data, source 4, previous employer data, and they'll form a picture. That is what you do in terms of creating that data science, the business understanding. And then what you do with that is the operationalization. So you say, okay, now that I've got the data, I need to get this ready. And that's when you start looking at the application aspect of it. But this is basically the starting of what is AI. This is what AI generally does for you. There is a second part to that, which is where how it does it. That I'll come to that shortly. What are the key components? Generally, you will have, and this is something I've used from AWS, where it's common, we use that. You will have something to define the data movement. You will have something that defines the governance. So how will you store your data? What kind of backup do you have? Do you even have any backup? Do you need to store that data? When do you get rid of it? I mean, do you really need to keep that? This day and age, everybody thinks keep everything. I have an exact opposite thing in our company, is we don't keep anything. We only use it for what we need. And I'll explain that a bit later. And then there's metadata. Metadata is data created from data, and then user access. So metadata, to put it very simply, you take a set of data sets and make some information from that, and that's metadata. So it's basically taking data and making some inferences on that, and that is owned. That is an extremely important thing to understand, and that's where in the wider world, we are the product, and our metadata is actually the stuff that pays for it. And then, of course, there's user access. How do you access the data? Who's got the right to access it? You hear all the time that there's been data breaches of all sorts. What does that actually mean? It means that someone was not actually putting proper governance and user access in place, which is why my username password was compromised someplace. So these core things you need to have, and to be honest, whether it's AI or otherwise, you normally have that. And how do you store that? Is it central? And then on top of that, then you start with analytics, meaning you're expecting certain results and you know what you're expecting. And then you train, meaning you get that system to start predicting data the way you've actually seen it. And then you start building that algorithm further. So you start seeing trends you never thought you could even believe that was possible. That's basically the components. Then let's go to what a typical layout looks like. Typical layout generally would look like this. You would normally take in data that sits, this data lake is where it's a huge amount of data coming in from different directions, structured, unstructured. And you could have it on premise, you could have it real time, you could have it on the cloud, doesn't matter where you keep it, you could secure the cloud. And then on top of that, you would have analytics running and machine learning doing its magic. And that's generally what you would want it to do, where it is very open and comprehensive because it's constantly churning that data. It has to be secure. It has to be scalable if you're working for a large organization. Even otherwise, the whole idea of churning data is you want it scalable. You want it when you say durable, meaning you want persistent data, you want the data to come in and make sense of that, basically. And of course, everything comes down to cost. And this is where I say our techie world gets very carried away, very, very carried away, and we make it very complicated for our own liking, for our own good. And this is where, in the new world, where we start doing things which are what we call loosely coupled, where you can take bits of it and put something else in without destroying the entire system. Microservices based, meaning you start creating small little functions rather than creating one giant thing. And then apart from this, you have to make sure these are modular so you can use one bit across different systems, and that makes it very cost effective. That's generally the long and short of it. In terms of how you do this, there's all kinds of things you can do in this. So you have, this is just a random example I got from a finance company we're working for. So you do the sentiment analysis, you look at customer lifetime value, you could look at debt prevention, you could do all kinds of things. Think of it as where an intelligent person would look at the data and make some inferences. That's exactly what the system can do for you. Now, this is my biggest bugbear, is AI and my data. And let me first explain what, and then I explain the why and some of the how. So we all have data permissions given to businesses. It could be for sales, and it could be for marketing, it could be for operation, the product stuff, and customer insight, finance, all of wonderful fancy business terms. What does that actually mean? It means that someone's taken your data in all such examples, and they've made you sign terms and conditions. And if you think logically, next time you walk into a store to buy a pack of cookies, or you're buying a television, you never have to sign over there saying that I shall not kill you with this laptop or the television that I buy. You don't do that. It's the most idiotic thing anybody would ask you to sign. I will not take this television and display my neighbor's pictures on this one. No one ever asks you that when you go and buy a television. I can actually go on with these examples. Yet when you go and use an app, and not just once, repeatedly, we ask to sign terms and conditions. And these terms and conditions are made by lawyers, and some very, very senior lawyers who've gone and understood how they can be taken to court and justify the actions that we have. Now, there are good reasons where we need to have that kind of information available, and we need to understand why we have that data. But in this case, I think in current day and age, it's mostly the tail that wags the dog, most places. Very rarely you find otherwise. And this is one of the first things we did when we started building our app called Fisheye Hub. And that then comes to this whole thing about digital fingerprint. I'll give you a good example. All of us use Wi-Fi, okay? And every device in relation to its Wi-Fi is unique. And I'll explain to you how. So imagine yourself, along with the person you live with. It could be, well, of course, if you don't have an individual using technology with you, different story. Certainly not your pet. In some cases, yes, you're using technology to monitor them, and there are good tools for that. But if I'm talking about people, let's say there's me, my partner, and I've got 2 kids. All of them have a device, and each one of us has a Wi-Fi station on it. So when we log into Wi-Fi, it records that. And every time you go somewhere, you've gone and put the password in, it remembers the Wi-Fi station. That Wi-Fi station is unique. Now, if you look at your device and look at the Wi-Fi stations you've got on your device, check the one on your laptop, check the one on your mobile phone. Now go and check the same thing with your partner, or your child, or your colleague who works with you, or your best friend, or even your twin for that matters, and it'll be different. That's a digital fingerprint. That's one point. Then you think of the same thing every time you go and browse something, and they give you this wonderful screen which says, except. Earlier, before we had the EU regs for data regulations, you had generic stuff come through, and Generic means okay and gone. Now they give you even more fancier ones where you'll have to choose 1, 2, 3, or all. And there are even others who are more exotic. They'll take you to another page altogether, and you have to select those, and it'll take forever for you to come back. So once you've done this, twice you've done this, I do this despite knowing this, I get fed up and I'll say, okay, just take it, move on. And you'll say, okay. That's when you're giving them information like, when your browser goes out, there is a unique ID on your device. There's a unique ID for your IP address, i.e. from where you're connecting. There's a unique ID for the application you're using. There's a unique ID for the hardware components in different ways, the configuration of it, and not to mention the cookies. So meaning that although at that point, if someone says that, I've taken your data and I've not actually taken your personal identifiable information, PII. If you can take anything away from the session, take this away. PII. It's a thriving market. That's where all your free products drives that. And that then tells you what they need to know about you. So in this case, they will take the PII and they will then use that to determine certain things about you. And that's why privacy sits. Now, if somebody told you that I'll be sitting in your house every day and watching everything you do, or if you went to a coffee shop and they want to see when I come in, when I scratch my beard, where was I looking? What color of shirt was I wearing? And by the way, when that person gives you coffee, say, so where did you come from? And where are you going? Can you please tell us? And if you don't tell us, we'll just know anyway and we'll record it here. You'll be bonkers. That's exactly what it does to you every time you go to a website, every time you accept everything. And these are not great things. The reason it's important to understand that is because when you do this, when you accept these things, you're giving this to a system. Back to the point, if you think of it, sorry, I'm going back to the screen that I had. You're giving them data over here. Now you've given them all the data. And now it goes eventually into this machine learning operations. What do you think the machine is going to do? So I'll give you another example just to visualize that thinking. And that is, imagine you have a child growing in your house and you teach the child that every time that child looks at Uncle John, he will want to walk. He's learning to walk from Uncle John. But what you want the child to do is learn to walk because he's growing up with Uncle John. But Uncle John has a limp. What you don't want to do is him to know that I can limp like Uncle John. I can do things like Uncle John. I can mimic every one of his behavior. And imagine now an army of bots that you don't know anything about can start understanding you, your behavior, and in fact, know things about you better than you can and start predicting your behavior. That's why it's important to know what goes in and how do you analyze that data. So we created something called a learner's hub and now I'm part of that. So I went into the organization. We were trying to build something called as the SVE hub. It's a social value experts. They're very big on social value. And we're trying to build a platform there. And they said, we want to do this. So they want to do just capture social data. So I explained to them how it works. And I'll come back to this in a short while, just to give you the context. What we did was we said, let's look at the user journey on the hub. So people come in, they take the device, they'll define what the browsers are. Then based on the role, they'll go into the admin, learners, profile. They'll have big companies who will work for small companies, tell them to start recording the ethical value data. And it feeds back in that way when they are putting anything out there in terms of corporate social value. They say, oh yeah, we can show you how we measured. And those dashboards will tell them how they actually did. Where they couldn't understand is how many points could people's personal information. So if you're doing something ethical, surely data privacy is one of it, and respecting people's privacy and information like that is important. So from that perspective, if you think of it, the moment this user comes in, the device data can be captured. This data can be captured. When they go in and log in, their personal data can be captured. When they go in and start learning, you can create metadata to understand what were they learning, why were they learning at the individual level, or even look at which management was involved in pushing which one, and so on. That's too personal. That's not why we are building the system. We were building the system to make it more ethical, to collect information and share with them. So then we decided, okay, what do we do? So we said we need a warehouse to collect that data. We need a learning module. We need analytics. We need integration and security. So the question was, how do we do this in a secure manner? And then after speaking to several different service providers, we realized nowhere where you go can you own the metadata. So we'll have to hold the data ourselves. If we hold the data ourselves, then we have to have the burden of securing it. But then also then we have to make sure it's integrated with other systems. So then we built this Fisheye Hub platform. And that hub platform took me 8 years to build. And the reason why it took me 8 years is when I started off, I couldn't find anything where if I loaded something onto a system, whether it was the known softwares of the world, I didn't know how much of it would stay secure. So we had to build our own secure walls to make sure anything that comes in can stay that way. And then from there, we decided, okay, you'll have insights, you'll consulting, but that means it's truly obfuscated. And what I'm trying to say over here about this one is when I say truly obfuscated, it means that this particular thing will always report back on group data, on specifically data that cannot be identified against individuals, because the algorithm will stop doing anything that starts correlating information to create digital fingerprinting. And that's very important to understand, because most applications that you do outside, only reason why they do this is for user experience. But then honestly, if you ask yourself, when you say user experience, is that really user experience that we're talking about? Or are we talking about maximizing our sales? And then goes back the same logic that if I go to a coffee shop, then I'm going there to buy coffee. And if I'm selling shirts and I'm selling loans and I'm selling a watch, then I will not focus on selling the best coffee in the world. And that's a very important point to understand, because then if I'm not selling anything else, I'm only selling coffee, and my platform only lets you sell coffee, then I will want to sell the best coffee in the world. Automatically, my entire value chain changes. And that's the ethos we try to build in. And that integration platform is Fisheye Hub, where that's what we do. We'll give you the information that's relevant to you. There are places where you can identify, but those are very, very specific ones where you want it to be done for specific use cases. And there'll be a different process for that, a different user journey for that. So what can we do with AI? I'll give you some examples. We've done things where you take just basic things and you take management information systems, you take that data, you create very wonderful graphs. Excel does that, amazing thing. Power BI does that, a partly machine. So you will have that basic stuff and you'll describe the data. This is how it looks, this is what it is, and so on. Then you can go further down and say, not just this, we can probably start looking at a bit more in terms of where we say unsupervised machine learning. So you understand the data, you explore what is the art of the possible, and you do the different analytics within that. And when you start doing that, you understand certain trends. But alongside that, you're also looking at supervised and unsupervised learning, which is where you start doing predictive stuff, where if you say that if I take Rajiv's picture and he has this expression on his face, it means he's smiling. That's predictive because I've told the system. And then I will take 14 pictures of Rajiv smiling in different ways. That's supervised learning. Then I'll give it to the data and say, now try giving me something else. And that's when it starts giving me that unsupervised learning where it'll find another one which will probably be smiling. And I'll say, yeah, this is fine. And I'll go tick. The machine learns that is a good algorithm, the way it identified. Or it'll come back another one where I'm not smiling, I'm wincing. And I'll say cross. That means I'm penalizing the system. The system understands. There's a difference here. It'll try and understand the difference. and then it starts learning, and that's when it goes into unsupervised learning. That is when your machine starts doing a little more than just your average analytics. That's when it's not AI, it's machine language that kicks in. And this is why I always say AI is a very, very abused term. Artificial intelligence is only when it's really intelligent. It works on its own after a little bit of teaching or training. So then why not Excel? Yes, you can. So there are people where they've taken data from Excel, put that into a SQL Server engine, it's a database tooling, and then from there you start taking data and then start what we call the scoring, where based on certain things we start giving it scores. It knows this is the right thing, this is the bad thing. So the tick and the cross that I was talking about. And then it goes into something called we use Power BI analytical tool, and this is a pre-configured tool as provided by Microsoft, and you can go and configure that and start making it do things. So there is a ready tool in the market where you can use that. But that comes through what we call the structured data. You have to get it into a shape where it can start doing that. And then you can do all kinds of fancy reports where you start talking about things that didn't make any sense earlier. This is a company in India where we worked with them and provide them a solution. You can do all kinds of exploratory data analysis. So we looked at credit card transactions. What features are there? So what was the number where the transaction happened? What's the account number, date and time? Or you could have the transaction features saying number of transactions from there in the last 24 hours, or average number of this, average number of that. And then of course you can have the card type and expiration date and all the rest of it. Then comes the next part where you take the data and you say, I need to clean this thing. I need to look at what's missing in that data. Sometimes the data will come in and for whatever reason, it may not be the right data. It may be corrupt. That needs to be corrected somewhere. So that's treating the data. And before you treat the data, first you identify what's missing. Then you look at what it could be because it might follow a trend. And based on that, you think, okay, although it says 10.0 nothing, it might mean 10.04 because it's showing the trend which says that. And then as you start going through that and you start analyzing, then you look at the overall picture and say which one is not really making sense. There's a discrepancy. Take that out before you start providing any kind of making sense of that information. And that's when you start preparing the data. So you categorize them into numerical sets. In this case, because it was numerical data, you look at the data type in terms of the format that is there, you sample it, put it over a period of time, and then you start doing that analysis. So these are different types of analysis you can run: the regression, univariate, and multivariate, and so on. There are so many different things in the world of statistics. Now, Geek in me is getting super excited, but I will curb the enthusiasm. I'm sure you're not interested in getting bored. However, what's important is the attributes. That defines a lot of things. You need to know information that is defining that particular data set. So in this case, it could be, as it says, the date and time, the amount, the number of transactions, because we're talking about a point of sale. That's the device where you go and tap a card or you pay somebody at the tills and so on. So that's the kind of information you're looking for. That's when you start having the actual idea, the information about the data, which is the EDS, we call it exploratory data analysis. And based on that, we did things like you could look at the client background and say, this is the kind of information we have. And what was the problem? They're trying to look at trade promotions. They were trying to leverage the promotions so they can offer better incentives. Now, same thing. If you are really keen, you can do this in a very, very data privacy respectful way. And one of them would be you actually look at the customer experience rather than understanding the customer's personal details. And that's very important in a business world when you're thinking of AI. And because then you're actually looking at the core issues in a business. You're not looking at why John or I don't know, Rajeev or Jose or someone else were looking at certain things to buy. There you're looking at this individual in his late 40s was looking for a specific USB key, which is quite common in that space because the 19-year-old probably has never even heard of these stupid USB keys because they are used to clicking something on a cloud, getting a free cloud space and uploading things there. They don't care. However, Rajeev in his late 40s is very concerned because that data is valuable to him. That's the kind of information you're looking for. That's when you really understand what promotion will drive Rajeev's behavior. At that point, then you create the data audit for a group of Rajeevs, people in similar brackets, where you decide that's how I want it. And when the system brings that information back, it doesn't bring any identifiers. It's bringing outcomes that you're interested in, which means it doesn't store any of the past stuff. So which means after a while, it should be able to get rid of the original data. And there's no reason to fear that, because if you've done your job properly, and if you're looking at business value, then that's what you're interested in. And you're constantly then focusing on the business outcomes. You're not interested in whether it was Rajeev who bought it or Jose who bought it. And Rajeev was a stingy fellow who just bought a very, very cheap USB stick. And Jose comes in and he buys a very nice fancy one because he's really cool about these things. You're not interested in knowing that. You're interested in knowing what's a profile that works. Why does it work? How does it work? So you don't collect that information, but the machine then starts analyzing that. Your algorithm will do what you tell it to do, which means you have to decide at the onset what you want it to do. And of course, then you have various kinds of analysis and all kinds of stuff that you could do inside. You could go literally overboard with this. You could do, I explained this already, I'm not going to go through that, but this is all the kind of stuff you could do. And then comes the important thing. This is very, very, very important, especially in our day and age. So when you watch a movie, and there are so many online platforms, and you go and say that, I like this movie, I dislike this movie. I like this movie, I dislike this movie. What that does is, somewhere sitting behind is an algorithm or a server, which records that from you. This is where it can make it very personal to you. Then there, it's important that when it's making it personal to you, it should ideally be encrypted in such a way that no one can actually see the data. That data, the encryption, decryption happens only for the machine. And that's quite important to understand, because then the outcome is going to be, Rajeev tends to like these sci-fi movies. And he also likes a few other movies, which are comedies. And specifically, he likes this one particular comedian or this particular director. Then all it does is starts looking for movies which have a similar attribute. So when you go to the likes of Apple Music and Spotify, the algorithms are quite superior because they don't just look at what the category of that music is. They also understand how that music sits in the binary world. What trends do you see inside that music? And based on what I like, it'll start understanding the pattern of that music, and they'll start bringing the nearest one closest to it. So especially in the world of music, one thing you may not know is we're used to things that we're familiar with. So familiarity breeds a lot in your tastes, especially. So there they understand that, and they'll start applying those things in the probability world. And they'll start bringing more things which you tend to like because they've understood that in their algorithms, and they'll try and put that back. And constantly when they see something slightly different, they'll push that back to you because they've noticed that one which is very nice that you like, and constantly, one could be that they've noticed that people at a certain age tend to like that, or people of a certain attribute. That could be age, or it could be gender, or it could be something to do with your location, it could be to do with your nationality, it could be any of those. They tend to like those, they'll push that. And if you tend to like that, they'll create something more closer to that. So they'll create different ones. That
Rajeev, we have 1 minute left for the end of the session.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. So that's essentially it. To put it simply, we created this. What it does is this. You could create situations where you have an alarm where it notifies people. It doesn't hold anything. You could do that for children going to school, and you can have a geofence around it. So if they tend to go outside, notifies the school or the parent. Or you could have something for crowd management where you could literally click on a screen as an organizer and you can notify them. Basically, it's still doing the same thing, machine language without ever identifying people. And within that, we're trying to put augmented reality, meaning you literally physically reach a point and then you could be given a ticket in the virtual world. So until then, you don't get anything. That's what happens in the real world. You pick up your ticket. So you could pick that up virtually. and then you could go in there. And then inside the stadium, you could literally have geolocations on which base of which you could be notified and so on. Essentially, that's what we do as Fisheye. Feel free to go there if it ever interests you. Come back to me, go back to the company's website, aryaaaltd.com, and I'll be very, very happy to talk to anybody. If you ever think you want to get some idea about what you should do about AI, any project, drop us a line. Very happy to do that. It's all on the website. Thank you.
Rajeev, thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. You got into the details of AI, the promise and the reality of AI applications today. So we really appreciate that comprehensive approach. We had a number of questions that came up. So what we have, because we don't have time for the Q&A here, what we're going to ask the folks to do is that they are going on LinkedIn and they have posted the questions on LinkedIn. So later on, I'm going to tag you on the LinkedIn post, and if you can provide some perspectives on some of the questions, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about this topic, and I completely lost track of time. But
no,
yes,
it was fantastic because you cover quite a bit of depth on the thought processes and the realities of AI. I love one of the comments that you made that really resonated with me is that AI is so misused. You know, the other day I had someone who was doing multivariate regression analysis, and they thought they were doing AI. I was like, Kyle, this is like techniques from like a century ago. It's it does not have any level of cognitive, you know, capability. But in any case, you really cover the fundamentals very well, and then the applications. And there are some lots of interesting questions around privacy laws and how organizations adapt to this very fluid system, especially here in the United States, where every state has their own privacy laws that they're enacting right now. It can become quite complex. So Rajeev, on behalf of our global community, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to sharing your expertise with all of us today.
Thank you very much. Much pleased.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Rajeev Chakraborty with us, sharing his expertise, his knowledge about AI and the implementation, the fundamentals and the practical applications and implementation of artificial intelligence in the way that we work, in the way that we operate in society. We are going to shift gears with our next guest at the top of the hour. We're going to be taking a break now, and when we come back, we're going to have Angela Perry. Angela is a vice president of strategic alignment for transformation and consumer innovation at UPMC Health Plan. And Angela is going to be talking about aligning population health with digital transformation. It's a fascinating topic and coverage by Angela. I hope to see all of you back at the top of the hour for her presentation. Thank you.